Hello, kia ora. Welcome to a live stream, which is not something I'm used to doing without there being other people involved. And I'm trying to run a little bit of an experiment here where I'm doing this on Instagram as well for the first time, and maybe one day TikTok, but we'll see what TikTok says about that. Feel free to ask questions and comments and stuff like that in the chat. It should all come up. I don't know if the Instagram chat stuff comes through, but everything else does. But I wanted to go through some media theory stuff, which sounds really boring, but having a look back over the last election campaign and trying to pinpoint what it was that happened that made people vote the way they did made me realize that a lot of what comes down to how people vote and think and feel about things comes down to how they interact with the media and what the media tells them directly and indirectly. And I have qualifications in that, a bit of experience. So I thought, why not? Why not do something along those lines on a Friday night when I'm sure that nobody is going to have any other plans. So yeah, like I said, you got any questions or anything like that, please feel free to hit them into the comment section and hopefully I get them. We will see. But I thought I'd start off by giving you a bit of a recap of what I've done so far with media theory content. And I hope you've been able to find it. Kia ora, Mr. Anderson. It's everywhere at the moment. I've put it on all of my platforms, so it's really easy to find. What I find when I'm making it is I prefer the widescreen versions when I'm making it. So something like YouTube or Facebook feels like a better experience to me while I'm watching it. But the the portrait ones, they do the trick. They're much more fun to watch and try and put subtitles on. So let's see if I can make this work, because it's been a while since I've had to use this kind of technology. So the first one I started off with was actually about public perception of politics and politicians. And the reason for that was actually very seasonal. It was because they made an announcement that Jessica Mutch Mackay was stepping down at TVNZ. And I know some people aren't a big fan of hers. I know that there are a lot of people who put a lot of work, no matter which way they lean in their bias. So I have a lot of respect for people who do that, even though I don't necessarily always agree with how they go about things or the outlook that they put out there. But this was a really good chance to be able to say, this is how important this kind of element is. And I think a lot of people underestimate just how much influence these have, because the overlap between the people who watch broadcast news and the people who vote is a circle. Like it's kind of scary, but young people don't tend to watch broadcast news and they don't tend to vote. So having somebody who has that much influence over the people who do go out and vote in one way or another, I just thought it was fascinating for people to sit down and think about it. And also because we've had people like Jessica on our screens for so long, we forget just how much of an impact she actually has. But her bias was really clear, especially during things like the debates. So having somebody new in there, and I don't think they've announced who her replacement is yet. I imagine they've probably only just started the process, but having somebody new in there is really a fascinating thing for us to, in sort of 6 and 12 months, sit down and go, look how the language has changed, look what the terminology is that's changed, because all of that kind of stuff is how we work out media bias, which is actually part of tomorrow's video. There is a video about how you can work out bias tomorrow, and the way to stop people from claiming things like anything that center politically is far left because they're embroiled in far right stuff like a certain Twitter troll did today. But we'll get to her shortly, eventually. The next thing that I did, got all the screen grabs from YouTube, didn't I? Next thing I did was about clickbait and rage farming. This is a really interesting one because I use the term quite a bit when I'm talking about conspiracy theorists. Hey, Simon. Yeah, I talk about conspiracy theorists and I mention rage farming quite a bit, and a few people don't really get it because it's a relatively new term. But it is very much the idea of saying something so outrageous, whether you believe it or not, that people who are angry at you are going to push your narrative. And we actually saw a really good example of somebody owning up to that today. David Seymour put out a video tonight where he thanked Te Pāti Māori for talking about his principles bill for the treaty, because it's giving him free publicity. People are talking about it and know what he's talking about, and have a really good idea what his stance is on things based on the messaging that's coming from other parties and other people who are understandably really upset. He is an expert, and a lot of right-wing actors are really good at this, at creating so much rage in something that the people who are angry spread the message without realizing it. They are kind of like carrier monkeys that don't realize that they're carrying a disease, and it can be really pervasive. And we have a number of them that work really hard in this country to make sure that they hit that mold. People like Annie O'Brien, for example, is one of them. Cameron Slate is one of them. Even people like Judith Collins, to a degree, pretty good at trying to get people so upset that they start spreading the message a bit. But it was really fascinating tonight to see on the news, or see David Seymour release that video where he's like, yeah, I don't have to do anything, free advertising because you guys are spreading the message. And it's a really tough one because you always want to piss people off. Like you want to put those people in their place. So it's fascinating. For me, it's fascinating, like really fascinating. Then I actually went on and did some talking about algorithms. Now, algorithms, I'm sure you've all come across them. I'm really concerned about mine because I accidentally used my personal Facebook account to look up for an image on tomorrow's video from Reality Check Radio. So I'm sure I'm going to start getting ads and stuff like that through there fairly soon. Reality Check Radio is one of those really pervasive things that knows how to use algorithms really well if they don't get taken down off a platform. Same with Voices for Freedom. But the way that each algorithm works is different. But they all have the same basic criteria. They're going to take things that you look at and they're going to force feed them back to you in some other shape, way, or form. And the reason I did this one was because I had a whole bunch of people that were commenting on my YouTube page going on about cramming Te Reo Māori down their throat. And it's ridiculous. I actually had to deal with a client of that tonight where they complained about the use of Te Reo Māori in a social media post about an event that's in Italian. And I thought that was really weird, very strange. Free PR lessons when you sign up with the Atlas Network. Yeah, that they have a lot of tendrils. Like I saw that the Free Speech Union, I think it was, or the Taxpayers, must be the Taxpayers Union, very excited about the fact that 16-year-olds won't be allowed to vote in local body elections. So I'm not surprised. It's right out of their playbook. It's not like 16-year-olds don't pay taxes, but ask them and they won't believe anything of the sort. It's ridiculous. It's quite fascinating though how people don't understand algorithms, how they work, and they feed back information into them. And we've got really clear examples of them shaping countries. Brexit was really well fed by the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the idea of algorithms feeding people back information that confirm their bias. Ultimately, all media theory comes down to the fact that people are selfish. Like they're very inward looking, they're selfish, and they want to believe that everybody sees the world they do. And it's kind of shocking when they don't. It gives them a little bit of a mind fuck sometimes. I do apologize if there's any kids watching. I doubt it. 8 o'clock on a Friday night, they'll be on the PlayStation or out playing. Right, and the next one I did was about coded language. And this was actually in response to a video that someone else did where they picked apart one of my pieces of content, where one of their criticisms was that they didn't feel that there was coded language between something like the anti-co-governance stuff that we saw out there and tying it into an organization like Te Pāti Māori, or specifically pinning it on the Māoriness of somebody like Nanaia Mahuta. And if you don't know the codes, you can't see that coded language hidden in there, which is really fascinating because there will be people out there who are very specifically looking for codes. I actually have some hidden codes in my office. Like it's one of those things that I put in the background so that people are aware that it's there and they can feel it might be a safe space if it speaks to them specifically. I'm not going to go through them. You don't need to know what they are, but they're there as symbols to give people those messages. And we see it all the time, particularly with the work of organizations like the Free Speech Union or the Israel Institute for New Zealand. Those kind of, it always seems to be the right-wing groups are really, really good at picking up on the stuff that manipulates people the most. And this is one of those things that can manipulate people quite well. You get idiots like Garrick Tremaine, though, who fall for it. And if you've ever seen any of his cartoons, you'll see he's just a racist old twat, but he uses that ideology and the symbology that he sees come through in other discussions to create his content. So that's him being able to decode something that's being given to him in another way. And I found found that really fascinating. I thought that was the kind of thing that a lot of people don't realize about. And, I hope that people pick up on it a little bit more. Sometimes you can go a little too deep and find codes where there aren't codes, though, and that's where it gets really super tricky. Um, I have a relative, for example, who, to be fair, has some serious mental health issues, who thought that the noise that chickens made when they pecked the dirt looking for bugs was a code that was telling him his wife was dancing naked, topless on tables somewhere down the street. So it's really possible to have those kind of codes that aren't actually there that people still interpret, but it is really important to know that there are coded messages going out there and that people are finding them. So it's a case of keeping an eye out for them. And no, she wasn't dancing on tables. The chickens got it wrong. And then I wanted to talk about something called muted group theory, because muted group theory is one of those it's a really fascinating thing to sit down and look at in terms of the context of Aotearoa, because we're such a classic case of it here. The idea behind it is that you have a dominant group in society and a marginalized group or groups in society. And the dominant group basically does everything it can to keep the marginalized groups down. And anything that marginalized group does to try and assert itself or find its own footing or exist in some cases, that gets fed back by the dominant group as a pushback that they don't like. So they find ways to keep groups in society marginalized. And it can be things like changing the use of Te Reo Māori in government departments. That's a really simple method of marginalizing a specific group. The use of Te Reo language on road signs, telling people that it has to be in English when it isn't elsewhere in the world. Why should it be here? But it keeps that group marginalized. And what we saw over the last week, actually, was a specific marginalized group, Māori in New Zealand, having a couple of really good opportunities to push back. And they weren't violent. There was no sort of conflict with the pushback, which makes it really hard for our media to be able to sit there and find a way to argue about what's going on or to vilify or to mute this certain group, other than simply not talking about it. And you can see that in the way that media coverage looked at something like Hui a Motu, or even the media coverage that we had around Ratana this week, because there was a little bit of conflict there, and that came from the parties that were trying to minimize and mute groups. It's really a fascinating thing to sit down and look at, and there are examples all over the place. You can find it with things like the rainbow community, senior citizens, the disabled community. Like there are heaps there. It's kind of scary, actually, when you sit down and look at it that way. Then I wanted to talk about the cultivation effect, which is long-term media exposure and how it changes your reality. And again, this was one that came about because there was examples in the news. And the thing about all of this that I'm really hoping everybody gets is that you can watch stuff on the news and put this into practice. You can see what's happening on your feeds and go, yep, that makes a lot of sense. I can see where this is coming from. The cultivation effect is very much a long-term one, and it ties back into that very first one that we were looking at about changing perceptions in politics with those new political editors. Basically, you're exposed to media information and messaging for so long, you start to believe it. We see it a lot with conspiracy theorists because they're in such a tight-knit bubble when it comes to the way that they communicate that they don't get an outside viewpoint of anything. But when it comes to pretty much your average Joe blogs, if you're being given the same messages day after day, week after week across multiple media streams, you're going to start seeing that shape the way that you see the world. And the example that I used in this one was actually around youth crime rates, because as much as people were telling voters before the election that the crime rates are going down, that there's good news there, no idea, Simon. No idea at all when we get a new political editor. The last job interview I had with TVNZ, the process took 3 months, and it was not a fun process. So I'm not sure how long it'll take unless I've already got somebody in mind, but I'm sure they'll make a big song and dance about it, because why wouldn't they? But that person's going to be really powerful. They're going to be able to dictate what people are exposed to over the next 12, 18 months, or 3 months until we have another election at the rate that we're going, if Mr. Luxon doesn't put his foot in it, because he's really good at that. Really good at it. All right, then there's the gatekeeper theory. Now, this is one I don't think I did a very good video on, because the idea behind it is who decides what news is, because Now it's much more of a collaborative effort than it used to be. News these days is kind of dictated by what does well in social media. It used to be, if you go back to the old Noam Chomsky manufacturing consent era, it used to be that what was in the news in the morning would be what led the news at night. But that's not so much the case now because everything moves so fast and we have a 24-hour news cycle. Um, it's one of those things, kia ora, Paul. It's one of those things that because technology's changed and society's changed, how the gatekeepers work has changed as well. So now they'll be looking at what pops up on Twitter, for example, what's a really popular tweet that people are talking about that goes viral that they can put on the news. So we as a public have a bit more say in being able to say something is being able to give the gatekeeper their job. The gatekeeper will still sit there and go, well, maybe I don't need a viral video of a kitten playing with a bunny, but I do need a viral video about a protest in Wellington that somebody's putting on because they don't like the fish and chips down there and pies for $9 a pop down on Oriental Bay is just far too much. Entirely up to the gatekeeper to work out which one is news, but we do have a say in that now, not the final say, but we do have some influence in that. And I think it's really important that if you know what you're doing on social media, you can have a play around with that tool. But this is also where that rage farming thing comes into play as well, because a gatekeeper is going to look and see what it is that's being pushed out there. And if it's something that people are rage farmed, that's what's going to be picked up on. That's why somebody like Annie O'Brien can end up writing in News Talk ZB or ZB Plus or whatever the hell they call it, talking about what happened with Golriz Gradaman. It's because of the fact that it went viral because it was being rage farmed. So the gatekeepers felt that that was the kind of thing and the kind of voice that should be newsworthy. So we do have a lot of power there, but so do other people as well. You just have to balance it. It's not always easy. And then I wanted to talk about agenda setting theory. Throat's starting to go dry. It's how media makes us think certain news items are important. And we actually saw that with Golriz. You probably picked up on the fact that she ran into a little bit of trouble last week, or the week before last. And if you are unfortunate enough to go on something like right-wing Twitter, you'll see that they are still yelling and screaming about her days after what happened. And having somebody like Kitty Tapu Allen have her story come out today has kind of ensnared a few people and inflamed a few people and made them angry as well. But that's because, in a way, the media has told them that they need to focus on this because it's important. There was live what's happening at Golriz's house, cameras on the door, and updates every minute of what party leaders have said or what was going on at the National Party conference at the same time and their viewpoint on mental health. It became something that the media told us was really important, when the reality is actually quite the opposite, because the Greens are in opposition. Golriz is a list MP. From a constitutional point of view, it actually makes no difference whatsoever. They haven't really gotten into starting to work in Parliament this year, so it doesn't have an impact in that way at all. It really is just a person going through a really tough time and the media following them around, telling everybody that they need to pay attention to that. And so setting that sort of agenda is what news can do. And we would have seen it in the past with a whole bunch of other things that weren't important, but also with things that were. You may remember, if you're old like me, September 11, all the news channels covered that 24/7, live feeds all over the world, because that was the kind of event that felt really important at the time. That was the agenda that they were setting. And everybody else did the same thing. What we don't have in this country, though, is a media outlet that really has the ability to push back on what mainstream media sets as the agenda. You'll find left-wing organizations like Big Hairy News, for example. They don't have a 24-hour news cycle. So they are only able to react to what's going on and only able to react to what the agenda setters have put into place. And we don't have a left-leaning news outlet to be able to do that, which means when it comes to long-term exposure, like the previous title was about, then that's when it starts to make people feel like the world is a much more right-leaning place, or that it should be a more right-leaning place, and it changes the way that people perceive things. The lack of resources for left-leaning media is a really big issue when it comes to being able to create balanced, critical thinkers. And our country does not have that as an option at the moment, which is something to be really worried about. And then I talked about transparency cues, which is basically when you find out if something's opinion or fact or news or however that they're choosing to put the material out there. It is one of those things that you kind of know and kind of want. And every year, AUT actually does a really big research piece around media trust. And every year for the last 4 years, it's been dropping. One of the big factors for that, according to this research, is trust in the source of the media, being able to differentiate between opinion and fact. And there's some shorthands. Most people, the research actually shows, and it's in a piece tomorrow, shows that most people under the age of 35 are actually pretty adept at picking up the difference between opinion and news. But people over 35 have a lot more trouble being able to identify them. So those are the people who tend to go out and vote, who tend to watch things like mainstream media news outlets at 6 o'clock at night and get their news delivered to them via Facebook. That age difference is really problematic because there's almost no bridge there to be able to gap everything and to make people who might think that mainstream news at night is always transparent, but that it definitely comes with a bias of its own versus, young people who know what the difference is between opinion and news, but don't trust the news because the news doesn't always deliver unbiased news. It becomes a really big mess, like a really, really big mess. All right. Then I talked about moral outrage theory, which, again, David Seymour's so good at this, and so is Winston Peters. Like it's terrible. This is basically rage farming done in the real world, meat space outside of the internet, as well as including the internet. And it's designed really specifically to make people angry. That big Fox News tries it all the time. Like Fox News has it down to a subtle art. Their caravan of immigrants that were coming up to the border just before the last US election, or Dr. Seuss books being banned, or whatever else it is, Taylor Swift being, I don't know, some agent for the government. Like those kind of really out there titles that most people who have critical thinking skills or who have a diet of multiple media sources realize isn't that bad. Well, moral outrage is designed to really get to those people who can't tell the difference. David Seymour is really, really good at it, as well as organizations like the Free Speech Union, the Taxpayer Union, Groundswell, pretty much anything that Atlas funds is very, very good at it. But Winston Peters is also somebody who's got a lot of history with it as well, even all the way back to when he got the gold card first started. War on Christmas. Yes, Simon, you're right. War on Christmas was exactly one of them. Not allowed to say Merry Christmas anymore. It's like, stupid, so stupid, but people fell for it. It's a bit like what's happening on Fox News at the moment is about a giant convoy of trucks heading to the southern border of the United States to stop the president from cutting wire. Like it's just all out there to cause rage and make people angry. Winston Peters has been doing it for almost as long as he's been an MP. Robert Muldoon thought that he was very, very good at it, and it works. And that's the problem. And part of the reason that it works is because, again, our voting public tends to be older and tends to be a lot more trusting and unable to differentiate things like opinion and critically think about facts being presented to them from multiple media sources. So when you have somebody like Winston Peters now, who's in Parliament, who has however many MPs he's got, who sits there saying things like, we need to take out RSE in schools because we don't want kids learning that kind of stuff, or we need to stop funding for amateur sports because 0.01% of all amateur sports players are trans women and they need to do something about it. That kind of thing, which feels like rage farming online, is the moral outrage theory in practice in the real world. It's designed to hit a certain group, make them super angry, get them all worked up and start screaming, won't somebody please think of the children? And it's a stereotype, but it's accurate. And then this is actually tomorrow's one. So this is a sneak peek for the 16 of you that are here. That's a little bit thing for tomorrow. So fighting media illiteracy with vaccinations. Media illiteracy is basically people who can't tell what media is in the spectrum of where it sits on a political left to right, or what actually balanced media is. And you've probably seen it everywhere, that you see mainstream media, for example, people complain about, how left-wing our media is in this country. And if you have a look at their profile, you see they're ACT supporters or Voices for Freedom members. They're in that alt-right, extreme right category themselves. So they don't see something that's centrist or even slightly right of center as being that. They see it as extreme left. But the way to fix that is to actually vaccinate people or inoculate people to it by telling them in advance that the media piece that they're reading is done by a left-wing organization or a right-wing organization. Gives them a chance for their mind to set in for it, basically, and go, oh, okay, I know what to expect, and they might be surprised they might find something in there. But the thing I thought was really funny about this one is that a lot of conspiracy theorists already do this in their own way. See, this is painful. Here's another one for you. Phil's got a great example. Principal of Hamilton School alarmed by rumors of cat litter boxes in toilets. On my recent trip to Australia, I dealt with my mother and aunt, who they're both the youngest in their family. We're outside having a drink, and I don't understand the whole woke thing about kitty litter in schools. And I thought, no, I'm staying in her house. I'm not going to say a thing. I'm just going to bite my tongue. Yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. And this is one of those stories as well that starts off with a really tragic start. There are some schools in the United States that have kitty litter trays because of the lockdowns if there's a gunman on the loose. So they need to have somewhere that children can go to the bathroom, and that's the best option that they were able to come up with. Horrible, horrible thing to have to deal with. That's gone into this weird, out of control rumor that just keeps going and going. And people who don't have the media literacy skills to be able to go and look at different sources and find this information because they don't want to or because it's big and scary, they're the ones that are causing us the most problems at the moment in terms of the way people communicate online as well as offline. And they're the ones who are going to cause us the most problems going forward because they don't understand that they don't have the skills to be able to interpret everything correctly. A really good media diet's going to have a bit of everything in it as well. Stuff you might not necessarily agree with, but it gives you a different perspective. And there's a whole bunch of side effects from it as well. Like you end up being more empathetic to people if you have a better media diet, and you end up sort of understanding where people's perspectives are coming from a lot more if you can see different points of view. But as I was saying before, bloody Joe Rogan. Conspiracy theorists are really good at using this already, because what they'll do is they'll post something from a mainstream media site and they will preface it with, well, this might be from mainstream media, but. And so they've already warned their people that that's what the point of view is that's coming across, that they might not necessarily agree with it because they don't understand what's being told to them, but there might be something in there of value to them. That's not a bad thing for them to be doing, but the way that they set it up as this is from mainstream media, but that can be a really strange framing. One of the other things I talk about in this video is actually how we work out left and right wing media, in case you ever have somebody turn around and say to you, yeah, but I'm sure that One News is really, really left wing, because it's really not. It's really not. And there's a whole bunch of tools that we use that one. So hey, check that one out tomorrow. It'll be coming out about 7:30 in the morning. I think I've scheduled it for 7:30 in the morning across platforms. So that's it. What I'm hoping, though, that people have been able to see with all of these, if they've seen all of these, even if they haven't, is how they all tie in together. Because every theory feeds into another theory. Fighting media literacy or illiteracy feeds in really well to who our political correspondents are and how much trust we've got there. That rage farming one and the moral outrage theory, those two are tied really closely together. And again, that feeds into what information has been put out there for long-term effects of people being subjected to it. It becomes all really big and intertwined. And I feel myself, as somebody who's studied this, it's really hard to not see what happened in the last election as a breakdown in the way that we communicate and how media communicates with us. And I don't know whether or not that's what resulted in the final election outcomes, but to me, that's how it feels when I sit back and see somebody like Chippy say, well, we lost and we can't really pinpoint what caused it. You're never going to fix the problem if you can't pinpoint it. Well, at the same time, you've got an organization like Top and Gurum, who national hired for their social media output, crowing about what they did for people's social media outputs for their party. And they did very well in terms of getting their message across to people. I don't know if they got the younger vote because there was a lower voter turnout, but it still got the message out. So yeah, for me, it's all big and fascinating and intertwined, and I would love to know what your opinions are on this. If there's anything else that you'd like to know about, if you've got any questions, where you could find that kind of stuff, anything like that. Yeah, feel free to fire away in the comment section. Is ground news recommended for media literacy? What do you mean by ground news, Simon? Don't know the term. But yeah, let me know. It's all good. And in the meantime, for anybody who might be here who's voting in the Hamilton East by-election, that's coming up at the moment. Votes have to be in by February 17. I will be in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton on Monday with It's in the Ballot. I will be there being the person who holds the boxes. I don't know if wear a pretty dress or what the story is, but it's going to be fun. It's half a dozen candidates, I think, coming down out of 16. Roger Stratford will be there. Remember Roger? Roger, you can't allow Māori into Garden Place until they get rid of that attitude of theirs, Stratford. He'll be there. It'll definitely be fun. Definitely be fun. This is a really interesting one, actually, Mr. Anderson, because Hooten is so entwined with what's happening in government and the parties that are there. It is really quite fascinating to see what insights he has and puts out there. And he can be very right-wing. He can be very centrist as well. But yeah, his insights are always a really fascinating one to look at because of those connections that he's got. Let's have a look at this. Ground News uses a website that compares media by political biases and potential ownership, but it's a paid service. Oh, well, that would be the kind of thing that'd be kind of interesting to sit down and take a look at. It's anything that gives you an idea as to where an organization, a media outlet leans is really good to help with your literacy when it comes to media. But also being really well aware of things like how they promote themselves and push themselves. You don't necessarily need to go to a website to tell you that. In this country, there are some media outlets, for example, that are a lot more right-wing, clearly, like News Talk ZB or the New Zealand Herald. They're pretty easy to be able to do checks on. The things that are more problematic are things like Stuff, because it can be quite centrist at times, but it generally leans towards the right, which is, yeah, it's... I'm kind of curious though, Paul, because he's using the app. What do you think of it? What's your viewpoint on it? Does it help with analysis? Might have to look into it, do some digging. Yeah, it's media literacy is one of those things that I'm so passionate about people getting it right, which is weird because I'm not usually passionate about anything other than chocolate. Chocolate is good. So yeah, catch me for It's in the Ballot on Monday. Sam, who hosts it, gave me a call this afternoon. Yes, I'll do it. So it's on their website. It's in the ballot.nz. You can find all the details of the event there. And if you're in Hamilton, Kirikiriroa, I think there's details there as well as to how I can come and see it in person, because it'd be great fun to have everybody come down there. I'm all for a big studio audience. Always. It's always fun. I've heard of that one. Pull the other one, Lisa Owen and BHN, don't use the app. I mean, I do it myself. Oh, that makes a lot more sense. That does make sense. And that's a good mix. I have a lot of time for Lisa and BHN, the big Hero News guys. I cracked up, though, with that weird post from Annie O'Brien that she put on Twitter the other day about lefty men with beards. Like, she's not happy with trans people. She wants to define what a woman is, and now she's trying to define what a man is and how a man looks. It blew my mind. It was really weird. Very, very strange. And a little jealous. I was a little jealous I didn't make the list, but I don't know. Not really that sad about it, to be honest. But yeah, those are a really good mix. The work that Pat and Chewy are doing is really good. Like it's in depth, and that's the thing that a lot of people miss about media is in depth looking at and reporting and viewpoints. And they're very open and honest about what their political leanings are, but they'll hold people to account to the same standards that they've held other people to account. I think that's something that we miss in a lot of media as well. You'll see a lot of complaints, for example, around somebody like David Seymour not going to Ratana because it's a religious ceremony, but then going to other religious ceremonies. He goes to Diwali every year, for example. Those kind of things are really good to put him in his place and to sort of see what his stance is and how he looks at the world. But that in-depth work that you're getting from something like BHN basically holds a mirror up to his own claims in a way that a lot of other media just doesn't or can't because it's all soundbite based. It's a really interesting way that they do things. I'm hopeful that 2024 is a brilliant boomer year for them. So it'd be very exciting to see how they go this year. But yeah, they just need to they need to do like I don't know. I love the production value. I think it would be more interesting if they could get like the full inclusion of everything that they want to get technology wise. Um, what do we got here? Pac-Man and Patrick Boyle both pitch ground news. So it is an interesting scope. Yeah, it does. That is an interesting scope. Hmm. It's one of the it's a weird thing with news these days as well. And like I'm actually working with a client at the moment in the tech industry who wants to put together a newsletter using Chat GPT that scraped the internet to find what news is out there for their clients. And it's not going to be ground shaking or earth destroying. It's about computer data storage devices. But it's one of those things that when I heard that pitch that we use something like an AI for it, I thought it'd be very interesting to see what we got. So we're running some tests at the moment to see which way it tends to lean and if there's any sort of biases that come through for it. Um, Melanie's got a really good point here. Yeah, it was. He's a fascinating one, and not in a good way. Um, I, he's he's frustrating. The thing that annoyed me the most about him at the beginning, actually exactly a year ago, when Tamaki Makoto got hit by those storms, he wasn't here. He didn't tweet anything. He didn't put anything up on his social media pages. Every other MP, didn't matter where they stood on the political spectrum, at least put stuff out there about, keeping safe. If you need to evacuate, do this. If you need help, here are some contact details. All of them. And it was very much a hunker down, do what you can for your community thing. Here's somebody who's an actual electrician, like that's what he's qualified in, who didn't help anybody, who stayed quiet during everything, who didn't give anyone any kind of information about what they might need to do. And there will be people out there who don't follow, say, a Labour Party MP, but follow him because he's their local MP, for example. That information wasn't put out there. And then about a week after the event, the first photo up is him riding around in Lycra on a bike, checking up on people. And it just felt so disingenuous. It felt really awful to sit back and watch that because there were people in his community who were affected by that, in every community. I think I was supposed to be working in his community that week, actually, and there was just, it wasn't going to happen. Just, yeah, that frustrated me. And then you see the way he's acting now, and the fact he's got this new Ministry of Justice portfolio around the treaty principles bill. Oh, makes my skin crawl some days. Like it is really painful. And the explanations I've seen around the conversation that he was having there, the thing he's caught on film saying to camera, that was really interesting as well, because quite clearly it is a loaded comment for some. So either he had no idea what he was doing and he needs to make that clear, or he knew exactly what he was doing and he doesn't give a crap. So yeah, it's just, yeah. I heard David Seymour claim that Pai is not the place to debate the treaty. He said Parliament was the place. Ah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. They're there to listen. Yeah. It's just, I think that the 6th is going to be a really interesting day. The treaty grounds is going to be overrun. I know that there's been a few news articles already about just how many visitors they're expecting. I think it's something like up to 80,000 people they're expecting over the days around Waitangi. So it's going to be big. And, it's always an interesting one when you have a new prime minister going up there for the first time. And seeing how they handle things and what they do. It's going to be an interesting one, particularly for this government, particularly because their very first acts were to do things to that feedback into that muted group theory I talked about. It's kind of scary to see how that's going to work out. But I'm looking forward to it. Like, I know I shouldn't. I hope nobody gets hurt. I hope there are no instances of violence. But I think something like a dildo being left just out there where the politicians could see would be kind of a funny reminder to them of what's happened in the past. It doesn't have to be thrown, just needs to remind them. It could be fun, could be very fun. Oblivious, no, I don't believe her. No, I don't either. Yeah, he's such a weird one. Like, such a weird one. I saw a video with him and Jono and Ben where they put him up in some costume and he went out and had to interview people and say, do you trust politicians? Like, why would you trust literally the person in front of you who's in a costume pretending to be someone else asking you to trust them? Like, it's just so weird. And then his flipping accent, his accent changes depending on who he's talking to, is a really interesting one as well. It's, yeah. This is a very good question. It's a very good question. So I've seen two trains of thought on this. The first is that this is his bill, plain and simple. He's taking responsibility for it, and Luxon has said, you need to do and deal with this. I'm not dealing with it. So he can put ACT out at an arm's length. The other is because maybe Luxon is still not really sure what he's going to do. And the problem that Luxon has is that he can't really turn around and say, look, this is a waste of time and money. We're not doing this, which is what everybody is thinking, because that will break his coalition. Or will it? It's a bit of an if, what, maybe kind of situation. And, personally, I don't think we're going to get all the way until the halfway point of this term before there's some kind of falling out like this. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure that if this doesn't get past its second reading, like if it drops out in select committee stage, Rimmer will still turn around and tell people it's a success, because at least we're having conversations around it. Yeah, it's the thing that worries me is that we're seeing already the ACT Party in particular working really hard to silence people through due process. If you have a look at something like lowering the voting age for 16-year-olds in local body politics, for example, they stopped the submission process for that. They told people stop working on it, wasn't going to happen. But by silencing that submission process, it means people can't have their say about what's going on. And there was that whole rush through at the end of last year where they got rid of regulatory impact statements. It's less and less about trying to help people and achieve their goals, and more about asserting control and dominance. And that's not a way to run a country or a government, but it's what we're stuck with for a few years at least. So I don't know what else to tell you. Don't know it all. So I might wrap it up because my throat is really sore, but I hope you guys have at least learned something tonight. No, no, I don't at all. I think an effective Minister of Justice has an understanding of what justice actually is, because as a concept, it can be really vague sometimes. It's a really tricky area for the right person. It will be a nightmare for the wrong person. And David Seymour has no idea about justice in reality. He never has. And if you have a look at who he's surrounded himself with, that's not cool. No. So I don't think he will not go down in history as one of our better ministers of justice in any portfolio or role. It's just not going to happen. Confused about New Zealand first position on the treaty principles bill? Yep, I get it. They're playing their cards close to their chest, which is really interesting. There were a lot of crossovers with the two coalition agreements in terms of things like the reduction of the use of Te Reo Māori in government departments. So they clearly have some stance there that crossover. But I'm wondering whether or not somebody's had a word in the air, particularly Shane Jones, just going, we need to feed this to let it keep going so that David doesn't run away and we lose our jobs. But I also find it really hard to watch Shane Jones sit there and complain about something like, Huia Mutu, for example, when, he was an activist himself, like seeing that about turn. He, at the start of his career, really understood what the needs of Māori were and why they weren't being met, and how that could be turned around. And now he's just licking the lapdog, licking the boots of Winston Peters, and trying not to piss off his coalition partner too much. But notice how it's not Winston that says anything, it's always Shane Jones. It's because Winston's not very good at holding his tongue, and he knows better. The treaty thing is serious, but also a big distraction tool because they want to dismantle our quality public education system, privatize health range. Yeah, exactly. Like there is so much going on. And one of the questions I get most often from people is, how do we fight back? You have to be aware of everything that's going on, and you might be specifically focusing on an area that's important to you. You might be really specifically focusing on education, for example, or the treaty's principles bill, or looking after the environment. But you need to make sure you're aware of the big picture as well, so you don't get distracted and other people don't get distracted from your messaging. I think at the build up to the next election, there are going to be so many voices out there that try and pinpoint exactly what this government's done wrong, that it could effectively drown each other out. And that could be a problem because it means that the government keeps doing what it's doing because it wins re-election. So being aware of what's going on is really important, but also making sure that you know what's at risk across the board, because that is also really, really important. Yep, opening Overton window. I like this question. Why are we so mean? There's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm going to put it down to not enough chocolate. Nobody has enough chocolate. Where we are as a country, as a society, is a long, long road. It's a unique road. And part of that allows people to entrench themselves, dig their heels in, and feel that they're right no matter what. And we spent our immigration policy, for example, for 160 odd years was essentially, if you are white and English, you belong here and we'll give you free stuff. Like it's really horrible. But when you grow up thinking that you are the special people that have been given everything for free, because it gives you a really different attitude to people who have had to fight for things every step of the way. And I think what we're seeing is the culmination, unfortunately, of that kind of policy to get people into the country, and the kind of society that you get when people are brought into the country because they're made to feel special that way. But I wish there was a way to make everybody nice. Everybody could swap shoes for a while or something. It's a bit scary. Ka pai, John, much appreciated. Hope it helps some people. Yeah. Right. What I might do is sign off, because Instagram only goes for an hour, and this is the first time I've tried an Instagram live. I hope people watched it, I guess. Don't forget, if you haven't already, feel free to like and share and subscribe and do all those things across whatever platform it is that you're watching on. And there's a fresh video up tomorrow. There's no video Sunday because tomorrow I'm supposed to be living in the shadow of some really rich dude's house for a day. We'll see how that goes. I might give you more details on that one next week. Until then, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. It's really appreciated. I'm really glad I got to do this. I might do it again in the future about something else, but not on the nights that I'd be competing with BH, and I don't want to compete with those guys. They're awesome. Until next time, guys, ka kite anō. Thank you very much. I will talk to you guys later.